Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on developing the hydrogen economy. I'll shortly introduce our esteemed panel of experts, but first let me introduce myself and this topic. I'm Cordy O'Hara, President of National Grid Ventures, which is the competitive, non-regulated division of National Grid. We're focused on accelerating the clean energy transition in the markets adjacent to our company's regulated electricity and gas distribution businesses. We build, operate, and invest in technologies that decarbonize our economy and society, from large-scale renewables to modernizing energy infrastructure to facilitate additional clean power. Our operations here in the US currently include more than 1 gigawatt of solar and wind energy assets across the US and a portfolio of 3 gigawatts of traditional generation and battery storage on Long Island. We also recently entered into a joint venture with RWE Renewables to develop offshore wind projects off the coast of New York. National Grid is really proud to be the headline sponsor for New York Climate Week NYC. The event is a global opportunity to come together to accelerate climate action and assess progress ahead of the upcoming COP26 conference, of which we're also a principal partner. In this panel, we'll talk about the exciting role that hydrogen can play in the clean energy transition, especially when it comes to areas that are harder to decarbonize, such as industry and heavy transport. When hydrogen is burned, the only byproduct is water vapor. And when hydrogen is produced with clean electricity, the whole process is carbon-free, which means it's a much cleaner alternative to traditional energy sources. Hydrogen has potential to decarbonize multiple sectors, including industry, power generation, transport, and heating. Additionally, because hydrogen can be stored for days, weeks, or even months, it can play a critical role in providing long duration and seasonal storage, maintaining reliability and resiliency throughout the year. This will be of particular importance as New York State continues to add more renewables to the grid. This includes goals to obtain 70% of its electricity from renewable sources by 2030, which includes adding 6 gigawatts of distributed solar by 2025 and 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035. As more renewables come onto the grid across the state, hydrogen can provide long-duration storage to help smooth the peaks and valleys of electricity supply and demand, particularly given the variable nature of solar and wind power, for instance, when the skies are cloudy or the wind isn't blowing. With work continuing in earnest to stay on track to reach New York State's net zero by 2050 goal, hydrogen can play a key role in helping to decarbonize the entire energy system. The bipartisan infrastructure bill recently passed by the Senate would allocate $8 billion over 4 years for the Department of Energy for the development of at least 4 clean hydrogen hubs in the US. This shows that now is the right time to begin planning for these regional hydrogen economies. Let's think about this in more practical terms and about a potential hydrogen hub. A hub would bring together hydrogen production, storage, and demand, potentially for multiple sectors, integrated with other renewable technologies to ensure clean and reliable energy for consumers, improving air quality and providing sustainable solutions for future generations to come. Specifically, let's look at Long Island, which is particularly well positioned to bring this concept to life. Now, just visualize new large offshore wind farms such as Sunrise Wind, Empire Wind, and South Fork Wind, connecting over 1 gigawatt of renewable electricity to Long Island by 2025. Increasing energy demand in the New York City metro area, which is growing due to greater electrification of various sectors seeking to decarbonize, including a goal of 20% of new vehicle registrations to be electric vehicles by 2025. An island with limited transmission connections, currently relying heavily on local traditional power generation to meet its power needs, importantly maintaining reliability, but which is aging and uses fossil fuels. Goals for New York State to reach 1,500 megawatts of energy storage by 2025 and 3,000 megawatts by 2030. Adding more energy storage will be critical in enabling additional renewables development. So how does hydrogen play into this part of an integrated, clean, reliable energy system for New Yorkers? Now, imagine offshore wind bringing bulk clean energy, but also producing surpluses of electricity at times when the wind blows and demand is low. Via electrolysis, we can produce local green hydrogen on the island for storing high volumes of energy to use at different times when demand is higher or for other sectors. And what about when the wind is blowing less or is intermittent? Imagine keeping energy supply reliable by using stored green hydrogen to power generating turbines. Imagine transitioning Long Island's traditional power plants to run on hydrogen, both clean and flexible, providing reassurance no matter the weather. Now let's further extend this vision. Hydrogen can help decarbonize transport, including trains, ships, aviations, and heavy-duty ground transport, such as buses or tractor-trailers on the island. To help keep these hydrogen-powered sectors fueled up, there'd be an opportunity to build out hydrogen fueling station infrastructure, which would be very similar to traditional gas stations. Unlike gasoline, however, hydrogen can be generated on-site or nearby through electrolysis. There's also an opportunity for hydrogen to play a role in decarbonizing buildings, being used in place of natural gas to heat homes and buildings. Hydrogen could be blended into existing gas networks up to 20% by volume. Multiple use cases can help accelerate the development of a hydrogen supply chain, which can create economies of scale and help drive down costs. Developing a hydrogen hub in New York has the potential to drive significant economic activity as well. In fact, US climate envoy John Kerry recently stated at the Hydrogen Shot Summit that hydrogen is slated to become a multi-trillion-dollar global market in the coming decades, with estimates that the sector could create 700,000 jobs in the US by 2030. Hydrogen has the potential to play such an exciting role in supporting the decarbonisation of our economy, and the great thing is that much of the technology to make this happen already exists today. However, it will take significant commitment and collaboration among a range of stakeholders in government, industry, and the broader public to make this hydrogen economy a reality. Action is already taking place on this front. For example, as part of the Energy Earthshots initiative, the US Department of Energy recently launched the Hydrogen Shot program to reduce the cost of clean hydrogen by 80% to $1 per kilogram of hydrogen in the coming decade. This program is modelled after the highly successful Sunshot program, launched in 2011, which achieved its goal of reducing the cost of utility-scale solar by 80% in less than a decade. So there is no time to waste as we look to test and learn quickly over the coming years so that we can meet the urgent climate challenge that we're all facing across the US and around the globe. So with that call to action, let's get our esteemed panelists into this discussion. I'm very pleased to welcome our experts in the fields of government, academia, and industry today to talk about the role hydrogen can play in this effort. Our panelists include New York State Senator Kevin Parker, who represents the 21st District in Brooklyn and serves as chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. Dr. Julio Friedman, who is a senior research scholar at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. Claire Thornhill, Associate Director at Frontier Economics, who has worked on the development of low-carbon hydrogen business models. Andy Marsh, Chief Executive Officer of Plug Power, a leading provider of clean hydrogen and zero-emission fuel cell systems. Mike Hart, CEO of Sierra Railroad Company, which provides rail shipping to all of California and operates tracks through the heart of a number of the state's prime industrial areas. And last but not least, Rudy Winter, President of National Grid New York, leading our company's regulated energy delivery portfolio that provides electricity and natural gas service to 4 million customers across the state. So we're going to get straight into this panel discussion, and it would be wonderful to go to you, Julio, first. You recently published a report on green hydrogen in a circular carbon economy. What role do you see for hydrogen in a net zero economy, and what is needed to develop and scale the hydrogen economy?
Thank you very much, and of course, delighted to be here. Thank you, Climate Week New York City, NYC, for the opportunity. When it comes to the energy transition, we just need more. We need more stuff. And hydrogen counts. Low carbon hydrogen is the Swiss Army knife. You can use it for all kinds of stuff. And today we make about 70 million tons of hydrogen around the world. In the US, we make about 10 million tons every year, and we use it mostly for chemicals and fuels, but we use it already for a lot of different things. Green hydrogen is in fact one of the most promising ways to accelerate accelerate the energy transition in a just and fair way, and especially true in New York. It can undergird the power system and make it more reliable, but the big wins are actually in other sectors. In heavy industry, where there's very few other options, in the transportation sector, especially for heavy duty vehicles like trucks, long haul trucks, or ships. It can be used for heat, and sometimes industrial heat, but also residential and commercial heat in a way that provides heat on demand and is carbon free. And last, to think about in the future when we can have a circular carbon economy and we can take carbon in the form of carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide and turn it into things like building materials or fuels. Hydrogen becomes very important for that. In order to be useful in the energy transition, it's got to be cheap and it's got to have a low carbon footprint. And that low carbon footprint can come from renewable power. It can also come from wastes. Either way, it can be a fuel that can power all kinds of things in the world. In order to get to scale, though, there's a couple of things we got to do. First and foremost, we got to focus on markets. We need policies that align markets with these goals of decarbonization so that we can get the deployment, building both demand and supply. We also critically need infrastructure. The infrastructure we have today is enough to get started, but if we really want to go big, we're going to need new transmission lines, we're going to need electrolyzer stacks, we're going to need waste conversion facilities. These things will help get us to where we need to be.
That wonderful. I love your articulation of the Swiss Army knife. Let's look at sort of local application. And so, Senator Parker, it's wonderful to have you here. You've sponsored a bill in New York State, in the New York State Senate, to establish a renewable hydrogen incentive and financing program to help meet the state's clean energy and greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. Can you tell us a bit more about the bill and other activity happening in New York State legislature to advance the hydrogen economy?
Yes. First, let me just thank Climate Change NYC for having me here and the folks at National Grid for your leadership in our state in terms of not just providing our energy needs, but doing it in a sustainable way. And I was happy to hear you kind of lead with all the work that you've been doing, because I think this is critically important that customers and people in the industry know how important your company's leadership is in our state. As we talk about hydrogen, it is, as you heard the professor say, we need an all of above approach. It is not one thing or another. And so when I think about hydrogen, it's yes, because we really need to look at every single sustainable opportunity that we have in order to provide energy, particularly when you look at things like Indian Point nuclear power plant, going offline, which was 20% of not just the state's needs, but literally the regional supply of energy, that we really need to replace that as we, in fact, have essentially a consumer base, both residential and commercial, that's increasing in terms of their use, right? And generally, people here know that our essentially the more electricity we use, the less energy we're going to use, right? And so, kind of electrifying everything and finding ways to produce electricity is going to be important. But in addition, as again you heard the professor allude to, we have something like 2.5 million vehicles statewide that we're going to need to convert or to change over the next 25 to 30 years in order to meet our goals here of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the CLCPA, and meet those needs and those goals. And so I put forward a bill that would have us look at hydrogen. I don't believe in this moment that New York has directed its energy and is focused enough on building that hydrogen market. That hydrogen market, and from an energy perspective, obviously, is going to be important. But then it also allows us to use resources that may be going underutilized. We have a number of power plants now that are being mothballed because they've used their usefulness. I would love to see some of them repowered in a sustainable way. Hydrogen certainly is one of the paths to the repowering, and both will provide industry and residents the kind of energy they need, but also will produce full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits that our state can use. And so when we talk about the hydrogen economy, it works on both ends. And so the bill is kind of designed to to look at ways that New York can both incentivize the use of hydrogen, but also figure out what are the components that we need in order to make a hydrogen industry successful and sustainable in the state of New York.
Wonderful, and thank you for your leadership. You know, this concept of an all of the above approach, your focus on sort of multiple application, alignment to CLCPA, and the job creation community benefit is inspiring. And what I love about some of the next members of our panel is that there's real action happening across the different sectors. So Andy, just going to you, earlier this year, Plug Power announced a project to build one of North America's largest green hydrogen production facilities in Western New York. Can you tell us a bit more about this project and what Plug Power is focused on more generally in this space?
Absolutely, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. So we're another New York company. We're located in Albany, New York, right outside Albany. But Plug Power actually built the first commercial market for fuel cells. We have more units deployed than anyone else, 40,000 fuel cells. 25% of food in the U.S. ran through forklift powered by Plug Power during COVID. We've been doing it for a long time. We're also the largest user of liquid hydrogen in the world. And we decided to leverage that capability to build out the first green hydrogen network in the U.S. And, I mentioned forklift trucks, but I also need to mention we have a joint venture with Renault for vehicles on the road in Europe. We're building out our electrolyzer business. So it is we're building a huge business. We've grown in the past year, from about 600 employees to over 1,900 employees today. So in New York, we're building the largest green hydrogen plant in the world, which will produce 45,000 tons of hydrogen a day. From a vehicle point of view, that's equivalent to about 90,000 gallons of gasoline. We will be using green hydropower, which is provided from Niagara Falls, very much like how George Westinghouse did one of the first electrical networks in the Buffalo area years and years ago. But we're also, the electrolyzers used at that site will use MEAs and stacks, which will be manufactured in Rochester, New York. We're building the largest gigafactory in the world for fuel cells and electrolyzers right in our state. Across the country, we've already announced plants using hydropower in Pennsylvania, wind power in New York, solar power in California. So this network is being built. By the end of next year, we'll have over 75 tons of green hydrogen deployed. Additionally, we're going global. We have a JV with Acciona in Spain on the Iberian Peninsula that will generate 35 tons of green hydrogen. And all our products are liquid because it allows us to transport to where our customers need it.
Wonderful. I mean, that talk about scale, ambition, partnering, a wonderful feature of this hydrogen economy that is developing. I'm delighted to welcome Claire from Frontier Economics. It'd be great to sort of play in at this point a UK and European perspective. You've done a lot of work in the UK and Europe on the future of hydrogen, particularly around the business models and policy design. What kind of policies are being introduced in the UK and Europe to encourage hydrogen, and what sectors are being targeted right now?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this panel today. So let's start from the big picture. The EU released its strategy in July 2020, and that contains some really ambitious aims. So 6 gigawatts of green hydrogen by 2024, and 40 gigawatts of green hydrogen by 2030, and continued expansion beyond then. The UK government has just announced its hydrogen strategy, aiming for 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen by 2030. And that's expected to have quite a lot of blue hydrogen as well as green. So blue hydrogen being hydrogen that's produced from methane reformation with carbon capture and storage. So alongside these big ambitions. There's a lot of activity on the policy side. And I think since I've started working in this field, I've really noticed a growing realization that this is harder than renewable electricity, or at least more complex than renewable electricity. So governments in Europe have had great success in bringing renewable electricity online. But unlike renewable electricity, hydrogen is not a direct substitute for the fuel it's replacing, at least most of the time. So the key thing is getting a demand side off the ground at the same time as a supply side. And that's a real challenge that governments are grappling with across Europe and in the UK. And different approaches have been taken. So what we're seeing in the UK is just consulting now on a producer subsidy. So this would be a variable payment against a reference price on the natural gas price, I should say. And that will top up producer revenue to hopefully allow those producers to compete with natural gas. And there's various design features involved in that, which are aimed to reduce some of the demand uncertainty faced by those producers who essentially don't yet have a market to sell their low carbon hydrogen into. Germany, to take another example, Germany is really moving forward very quickly and is focusing instead on a consumer subsidy. So Germany is piloting a carbon contract for difference, so a mechanism that stabilizes the carbon revenue that some large heavy industry players can receive. And their focus really is on, I think, the steel industry and other parts of heavy industry that currently use grey hydrogen. So that's an example of the kind of subsidies that are going on. But another key element in Europe that's really been moving things forward is the IPCEI funding. So that's funding that EU member states can take up if they can find a project that crosses borders. And at the moment, there's a filtering process going on with over 400 projects going through the selection. And we expect tens of billions of funding to flow into those projects.
Great to hear examples and learnings that can be shared across the pond, and this focus on market creation, centers of demand. And so it'd be great to bring Mike in now and your perspective. It was announced earlier this year that Sierra Railroad and the Gas Technology Institute have an innovative pilot project to convert a diesel locomotive to a zero emissions switching locomotive powered by a hydrogen fuel cell system integrated with hydrogen storage. I'd love to get some details about this pilot and some of the enablers that led to the project.
Certainly. First of all, thank you very much. I appreciate you including us in the program. I play two roles here. One, I'm the CEO of Sierra Railroad Company, the oldest private railroad in California, where we operate freight and passenger operations all over California. The other role I play is I'm also the CEO of Sierra Energy. And how this came about was years ago, we were the first railroad in the world to operate on 100% biodiesel. So we started converting our locomotives over to biodiesel, but my friends in the environmental community pointed out that there are a lot of problems with biodiesel, based on land use and such as far as creation. And so we started looking around for a solution, and we found it in garbage. And that is taking garbage and converting it to synthesis gas, carbon monoxide and hydrogen, and then using that to make other valuable transportation fuels. And so we've taken that Sierra Energy technology, we call FASTOX, FASTOX, but taking FASTOX, using this technology to take any kind of waste, anything. We break it down to carbon monoxide and hydrogen, and we can get about 10% of what you put in comes out in the form of hydrogen. So if you put 100 tons of garbage into our system, you get about 10 metric tons of hydrogen out again. And it starts on the premise that zero isn't good enough. And that is that if you have windmills or solar panels or whatever making zero emission hydrogen, that's a great story, but it's not going far enough. Right now, we have an enormous amount of garbage being thrown around as a planet. Right now, the planet throws away 2.2, enough garbage to put a line of garbage trucks from San Francisco to New York City every single day is how much garbage we're throwing away as a planet right now. It's 2.2 billion tons a year. So it's a staggering amount of waste. And the thing to keep in mind is that waste going into the landfills creates methane. Very little of that methane is ever actually captured. And so methane is 86 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So if we want to do anything to reduce greenhouse gas as a planet, we should be focused on methane and those landfills. NASA has done overflights and found an enormous amount of emissions coming out of landfills all over the state of California, for example, and we're the most regulated state in the country. So capturing that waste before it goes into the landfill, converting it to renewable hydrogen, and then using that to fuel locomotives is what we're doing with Sierra Railroad and Sierra Energy. It creates a robust opportunity because for most of the people that are in the hydrogen space, you're going to find immediately, it's like, wow, I can make 10,000 kilograms of hydrogen a day. You turn around and find there's 6 hydrogen fueled cars in your entire community. The market isn't there yet, but we need that supply. And so the railroad industry represents a fantastic opportunity because with a single customer, you can create thousands and thousands of kilograms a day worth of demand by converting locomotives. So that's what we're doing. We're doing our first locomotive conversion starting this year. Our intent is to convert our entire railroad fleet into operating on zero emission hydrogen fueled by garbage. So we're preventing methane from going into the atmosphere in the first place, creating zero emission hydrogen for a captive fleets of locomotives that can be used both in freight and passenger service all over the country. And so that's our objective with Sierra Railroad and Sierra Energy moving forward. Thank you.
Mike, thanks for laying that out so clearly. I mean, the extent of innovation and integration there of different energy systems is phenomenal, and absolutely making the point around new business models and markets. Wonderful example. I do want to move to Rudy now because obviously, we do believe hydrogen has application in multiple sectors. And I know National Grid has a lot of work going on to explore the blending of hydrogen into gas networks to help decarbonize the heat sector. So, Rudy, it'd be great if you could tell us a bit more about the work that you're doing and really, articulate some of the projects the company currently has underway in New York.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cordy, and thank you, Climate Week NYC, for having me join this terrific panel on a really interesting topic. And when we think about hydrogen's role, as Cordy mentioned, and how it can blend into the natural gas network, we basically boil it down to 3 big questions we want to answer. The first one is, how do we decarbonize the heating sector or the building sector? The second question is, what are the biggest challenges in doing that? Usually it's around technology and policy. And then the third question is, how do we make sure that transition happens in an equitable way? So I'll cover the first question clearly first. So if you look around New York City, what do you see? You see some buildings that are pre-war, some buildings that are post-war, some multifamily buildings, some brand new skyscrapers. You see a building stock that is as diverse as the customers we have the privilege of serving. What does that tell you? That also tells you that one size of decarbonizing that building stock, one size will not fit all. We need, and this is a reoccurring theme, I think, we need a portfolio of technologies in order to do that. That's going to mean we're going to need to figure out hydrogen and how that blends into the natural gas system. We're going to need renewable natural gas from some sustainable biomass feedstock. We're going to need electrification, and we're going to need geothermal. But what makes hydrogen really interesting, and I think it's already coming out in this panel, is that it not only has the ability to transform and decarbonize the heating sector, it has the ability to impact so many other parts of the economy. The last point I'll make on this is, if you look at New York City, and I would urge everyone to take a look at the New York City Pathways Study. It was a study that we at National Grid partnered with Con Edison, another local utility in New York City, as well as New York City's Mayor's Office of Sustainability, on a study to look at what will it take to decarbonize the city by 2050. And one of the things we learned from that is if we look to electrify the heating sector, by 2050, we could probably electrify somewhere between 30 and 60% of the building stock. So there's still much more work to be done there, and that's where we see hydrogen playing a role. That leads me to the second question. What are the biggest challenges? The first challenge is around the technology. As I mentioned before, we do believe that the natural gas network has a real value in the future, especially if we can blend in a low carbon fuel like hydrogen into that existing delivery network. Those build the ingredients for something that is cost effective and feasible way of decarbonizing the building stock. So what are we doing? We're trying to answer all the technical questions related to blending hydrogen into the network and doing it economically and doing it safely for our customers. To do that, we partnered with a host of organizations around the country. NYSERDA here in New York. We've partnered with the State University, SUNY Stony Brook, to do some hydrogen blending studies. We're also a part of the Low Carbon Resource Initiative. That's an initiative with 25 other partners in innovation, looking at a 5-year program to understand how do we use hydrogen to help us decarbonize some of the harder to decarbonize segments of our economy, especially heating. So we're doing a number of studies to answer all of those technical questions. We've got some other studies, ideas that we're putting in front of our regulators, but we are also looking for real demonstration projects to actually put this into effect and make it real. So I'd ask everyone to keep your eyes open and stay tuned. We'll probably be announcing some exciting demo projects in the near future. The second big challenge is around policy. And I think Professor Julio Friedman already touched on the importance of policy and how we need policy to scale up these solutions. And I think there's no other better example than what the senator did here in New York and his leadership in helping move policy forward. If we don't look at the policy implications and make sure we have supportive policies, we won't be able to scale this up in the time frame that we're going to need to scale it up to give us the impacts that we want to have. The third big question we're trying to answer is how do we make sure this transition happens in an equitable way? I think we've all heard the huge potential that hydrogen has, and it's going to be part of that energy transition. One of the things that we're keenly focused on is making sure that that transition doesn't leave anyone behind. How do we make sure that all communities are ready for that? All communities get the benefit from that. And also all communities are ready for the new jobs that are going to be created in this energy transition. So on September 17th, I launched something here in New York called Project C, and that's a recommitment that we have to our customers and communities that talks about how do we connect our customers to clean energy. It talks about caring for our customers and revitalizing those neighborhoods, but it also talks about how do we do workforce development and get people ready for those new jobs. And I think hydrogen is a great example of creating some new jobs in this new economy. And we have to make sure that all customers are along for that journey. So very exciting time and happy to be here today.
Rudy, you've been very busy with the team, and it's great to see you bring all of that work to life here on the panel. I mean, we've heard a lot about, the role, the scale. We've seen a lot of ambition from our colleagues on the panel today, and a lot of discussion about application and benefits. But we're not there yet, and I think it's really be helpful to understand from a sort of range of perspectives. What do we need most critically at this time to advance the hydrogen economy, from your own unique perspectives? If I can start with Julio and from your own sort of learnings, how would you advise us? What needs to, what blockers do we need to remove? What are the next critical steps?
I want to start actually with something that Claire pointed out. These are not electrons, they're molecules. And moving molecules is its own thing. And we have to be careful to make sure that they are able to be used in the way we want them in a safe and effective manner, and that they are moved and transmitted in a way that's useful. So here's what I think we need. First, the hydrogen must be clean. To get there, we need standards that define what clean means. And that should be something associated with associated greenhouse gas emissions and associated pollution. Reasonable people can disagree, but if you don't have a standard, the market doesn't know what to do. The second thing you need supplies. If you don't have the molecules, you've got reliable, low-cost supplies, whether it is from waste with the kind of technology that Mike was talking about, or with electrolyzers like the kind of technology that others have talked about, you need to make supply. It must be cheap. This is where the market aligning policies like the kind that Senator Parker mentioned and like he's trying to enact matter. These could be a production tax credit, they can be an incentive, they can be grants to build things out, they can be like the hydrogen hubs you mentioned at the beginning, Cordy. But you need to make sure that the costs are reasonable because costs matter to so many people. Same sort of thing, it must be just. We have to make sure that you provide the community health and economic and environmental benefits along the lines that Rudy mentioned. Hydrogen, when it's used well, can reduce pollution. It can displace diesel fuel, reducing nitrous oxides and volatile organic carbon and soot and particulates, but you have to take care to do so. And that requires engagement of communities and giving them agency and platform, as well as just thinking carefully and well. The last thing we need most critically, and I was glad to hear Rudy talk about this too, we need more people. We do not have enough human beings who are trained in this yet. We don't have, the unions are not trained to make and use these systems. We don't have operators who are familiar with hydrogen. We don't have students who understand what hydrogen is or how to use them. We don't have regulators who are familiar with what hydrogen is. We just need more people getting into this business. And in that context, I'm looking forward to the next 10 years because, boy, there's going to be work for everyone.
Wonderful, wonderful. Loving the energy around that answer. Let's get a perspective from some of the other members of the panel. Try following that. Andy, over to you.
Yeah. So I listened to Julio, and actually I think a lot of those points Julio made, I agree 100%. But there's more going on already in the hydrogen industry than folks know. I mean, we use 50,000 kilograms of hydrogen per day. Every 4 seconds, a fuel cell power forklift truck's being filled up. We've seen costs go down 26% every time we doubled the number of fuel cells in the field. And I think we're on generation 3 and we're going to get to generation 8. So there's a lot that's gone on already that I think gets missed. This isn't a science project. This is real. When I take a look at what will move it even faster, I think the hydrogen hubs are great, but I actually think tax policy is more important. So if you look at the work going on in the House and the Senate at the moment, in both bills that are going into reconciliation, there's a $3 per kilogram tax credit for green hydrogen. That will move many applications which may not be attractive today, such as making green ammonia, which will automatically become competitive and will help drive not only government money, but lots of private investment. And I know that can happen because over the last year, we've been able to raise $5 billion in the public markets to support this activity. So in my view, when you take a look at the production tax credit, when you take a look at the ITC, where the House bill has an extension for the next 10 years, so there's predictability, that'll change it. I actually don't think when you talk to this industry, if you go talk to people like at Linde or many of my competitors at Cummins and other places, they won't tell you we need projects. We actually need deployments, and deployments at a commercial stage so that this can become bigger faster. I believe fuel cells are going to take off in the next 10 years, just like solar took off.
Thanks, Andy. I mean, one of the purposes of this whole panel was to, get the hydrogen story out there, some of the realities of the progress already made, and then the discussions on how to advance it further. Maybe can I play in Mike and then round this question out with Senator Parker. So, Mike, it'd be great to get your perspective too on this one.
Well, thank you. For starters, I definitely agree with what Julio had said. I think he hit on some excellent points, particularly around standards. because there does need to be a broadly accepted standard about how many nines are attached to that hydrogen to make sure that it is commonly accepted across the board. I think Andy hit the nail squarely on the head as far as the discussion about producer credit around hydrogen. That's a big deal. Finding the way to fund that initial gap, because the gap between the ability to provide hydrogen, which companies like Andy's and ours, we can provide the hydrogen right now. The molecules are available. The market is slowly forming. But unless you build at capacity, so if you build at a 10,000 kilogram a day capacity and the market is only 3,000, you're not going to build it. And so we have right now 9,000 requests from around the world from people who want to take our technology and utilize it. But the problem is there are gaps. There is not sufficient demand for many of those facilities when they actually start looking at the hydrogen equation. There just isn't the demand today. So either they build too small, which doesn't solve the problem, or they build at reasonable capacity, which drives the cost down. But you've got excess supply, and there has to be some way of solving that.
Thank you, thank you. And so finally, Senator Parker, a lot of focus there on business models, policy development, incentives. It'd be great to get your unique perspective on this.
Yeah, I think Mike is right, as well as Dr. Friedman and Ms. Thornhill, about we're kind of where we are. This is not plug and play. This is not the same as electrifying things, right? That we really do have to build out the market on both the demand side and the supply side. And so that's kind of where government comes in. That's part of what the study that I've put forward to get the Public Service Commission in the state of New York to look at as how do we build that, and as well as some of the inputs. I mean, what some folks have indicated to me is that we have a water situation here in terms of the amount of water that it actually takes to produce hydrogen. And in places like California, and maybe places like Texas, where drought is a part of their everyday reality, and it may be a little bit more difficult. But certainly here in New York, where we're very protective of our estuaries and the places where we produce water to make sure that we have good quality drinking water, figuring out where you provide these resources is going to be critical. But again, to go to Rudy's point about equity is absolutely critical, and to talk about how we train up people. And so part of the next conversation we have, certainly need to have some labor leaders as part of this conversation, to make sure that we are directly focused on it, and making sure that we are transitioning our workforce, because it is a great economic opportunity, but only if we handle it correctly.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move us on to a second question and play Claire in again with her experience from UK and Europe. I mean, where does it make sense to begin? How do we start this hydrogen economy? What end uses, do you see? What's the sequencing? What can we learn from the different countries that you've, modeled, analyzed, advised?
Yeah, great question. And I think what I'm going to say will hopefully align with what the other panelists have been saying about the various sectors that you're all working in. I think in the UK and Europe, industry is a really key sector. So all the language is around focusing on hard to abate sectors and heavy industry and high heat processes. There just really isn't that many alternative options available. So I think the kind of the sector that everyone agrees on for hydrogen to flow to, at least in the medium term, is industry. Heavy industry, however, needs a really resilient supply of low carbon hydrogen. It can't be kind of stopping and starting. Processes can't be shut down easily. And therefore, there's a role for blending in the near term, both to decarbonize buildings a small amount, and also really to just build that resilience and the track record on the production side. So I think we'll see a lot more activity on the blending side as well in the UK and Europe. Transport is also a big near-term option. So EVs, electric vehicles, have really taken off now in the UK and Europe more widely. But the role for hydrogen in heavy transport, I think there's a consensus that it will be needed. And in the near term, the kind of the first places to go with that are probably public transport, as some of the panelists have mentioned, just because the refueling network can be more limited. So setting up a refueling network on a defined bus route is a lot easier than trying to get it sorted for the surface transport as a whole. I think there's a lot of discussion about the role of hydrogen in heating in the UK and Europe, and I think various scenarios are out there. I think everybody thinks it will play some role because heat pumps and renewable electric heating aren't suitable for all contexts. But some countries like France are really pushing ahead with heat pumps. Other countries like the UK, things are moving a lot slower on the heat decarbonisation side so far. And there could potentially be a role for hydrogen to step in and speed that up. And I think the real attraction for low carbon hydrogen in the European context is to manage those winter peaks. So to avoid having to build up the electricity capacity to manage the peaks in demand, which are really quite large in the winter. And hydrogen could help with that in two ways, either directly providing heat or else fueling power stations during those winter months using hydrogen that has been generated when there's surplus electricity.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing all of those learnings and observations from Europe. Time is flying, so we're coming to the end here, but I did want us all to have our final say. So, it's more of a personal question for each of you. And if I can come to you, Rudy, first, it's, just what gets you most excited about the potential for hydrogen as part of the clean energy system?
Corey, the thing that excites me is just hydrogen's ability to help us decarbonize some of the hard to decarbonize sectors. That's the first thing. The second thing is the job growth and the impact it'll have on the economy, especially in places like New York City. And quite frankly, the third thing is I get excited about some of the demonstration projects that we're going to actually deploy and point to. So everyone stay tuned.
Thank you, Rudy. Mike, coming to you.
What I find most exciting about hydrogen is not only the fact that it's zero emission, but it's something, as I just mentioned earlier, that we can take emissions out of the atmosphere, not just create something that's zero emission, but by preventing that methane from going into the atmosphere in the first place, hydrogen presents a very unique opportunity for us to clean up the atmosphere while we're creating transportation fuels, such as for railroads.
Thanks, Mike. And over to you, Andy.
I'm fortunate enough. I started my career in Bell Laboratories years ago, worked in wireless back in 1982, started a company that was a broadband company, and been involved in helping to change the world. People can farm differently in Africa and India today because of those technologies. But what everybody on this panel is doing is helping creating a world that'll be just so much better for the future. I heard jobs mentioned. We're going to create great jobs. We're going to clean up CO2, and we're going to make a better world for the future. And quite honestly, that's why I'm still doing it.
Thanks, Andy. Love that. Senator Parker.
Well, I'm really excited about the equity issues, and particularly, as you heard a number of folks talk about, but particularly Rudy, is again this issue of creating full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits, for my constituents and the people across the state of New York. And I see New York as a leader on this issue, but I certainly think that nationally, the more that we build out this hydrogen sector, the more economic opportunity that people are going to need. Particularly now as we're coming out of a global pandemic, and people looking for economic opportunities to get back in the job market, on the energy sector and particularly the hydrogen sector is going to be a ground floor opportunity, not just for traditional workers, but also for entrepreneurs to get in at several different levels. And so I think I think it's important, and I think it's a great opportunity for everyone.
Thank you. Claire.
Well, I'm excited just partly by how quickly everything is moving. I really think 5 years ago, very few policymakers and investors were talking about hydrogen. And now, projects are being developed and we expect to see huge build out over the next 5 years. And I think that's just really demonstrates the capability of society to get behind good ideas when they arrive. So it's very exciting to me.
Thank you. And last but never ever least, Dr. Julio Friedman.
So before I tell you what makes me excited, I just want to tell you that we still got to be humble here. The whole point of hard to decarbonize is that it's not easy, it's hard. And we have to be humble about how much we need to make and how hard this will be. I'm enthusiastic about what Mike and Andy and others are doing, but we got to recognize that this is a team sport. Everyone will need to be generous with each other. We will need to build partnerships, spend money, and put our shoulder into it. But what makes me excited is how the markets and governments have woken up. This is not the conversation we had in 2002, where it was like, we got to get off gasoline and make some cars out of hydrogen. Here we're saying across the entire economy, across the entire world, we have an enormous challenge, and hydrogen is going to be a big part of that. And it's going to be big because it has to be big. And it completes a vision of a just, vibrant, and thriving world that I cannot wait to live in.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. We've come close to the end here. Huge thanks to this fantastic panel for really a lot of inspirational discussion about developing the hydrogen economy. I mean, it's clear from our conversation, there's a lot of great work happening already to explore various use cases for hydrogen. We've heard about Plug Power's work to develop one of North America's largest green hydrogen production facilities in Western New York, which will have the capability to produce 45 metric tons of green liquid hydrogen daily that could be supplied to the Northeast region. We learned about Sierra Railroad's innovative pilot to convert a diesel train to zero emission switching train powered by a hydrogen fuel cell system, a project that could lead to other similar pilots on railroads across the country. We've heard about the latest research into the hydrogen economy and what can be done to accelerate it further as a way to advance the energy transition. We've learned more about the policies being pursued in New York State to create the environment for a hydrogen economy or even hydrogen hub to take shape here. And we heard about the work that's being done to explore hydrogen blending into existing gas networks to help decarbonize heating for homes and offices. There's significant urgency to the climate crisis and the work that lies ahead to reach net zero. So it's exciting to learn about all of this innovative thinking and range of solutions being brought to bear to make an impact. And when it comes to tackling climate change, we need to take an all of the above approach, working many different angles to decarbonize various parts of our economy and society. We're going to need to decarbonize transport and industry, leveraging all of the technologies out there today and others that are currently under development. I really hope this conversation helps spark some excitement about the role hydrogen has the potential to play as part of the solution to climate change. We see significant opportunity for hydrogen from providing long duration storage to enable further renewable energy sources to decarbonising heavy transport, industry, shipping and aviation, as well as heating for buildings. So there's a lot of work ahead to make a hydrogen economy a reality here in New York, as well as in other potential hydrogen hubs across the country and around the world. And as this panel has shown today, it's going to take a lot of collaboration amongst various stakeholders in industry, government, academia, and local communities to make this happen. But I believe we can indeed make it happen if we work hard together. So thank you for taking the time to join our conversation today. And if you want to learn more about National Grid's vision for a hydrogen hub in New York, please visit our website at www.nationalgrid.com/hydrogen vision. So for now, that's the end of our panel discussion. And again, tremendous thanks to our esteemed panelists who made this just a wonderful conversation. Thank you very much.